Hello, and welcome to the MIC Plus One podcast, where I sit down with industry leaders to discuss the project-to-product movement. I'm Mick Kirsten, founder and CEO of TaskTop and best-selling author of Project to Product, How to Survive and Thrive in the Age of Digital Disruption with the Flow Framework. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome two incredible leaders, Paul Littlefair and BMK Lakshminarayanan. Currently serving as Chief Technology Officer at Bank of New Zealand, Paul Littlefair is an award-winning CIO with a highly successful track record of leading and transforming complex technology units within an enterprise. BMK is a value stream architect at Bank of New Zealand and is an inspiring and passionate DevOps advocate promoting DevOps, Lean, and value stream management principles and practices. I have been amazed at how they have been applying this shift from project to product and flow metrics to Bank of New Zealand, and it was great to dig deeper into their approach and lessons learned. So with that, let's get started. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Project to Product podcast. And I am just thrilled to have Paul Littlefair here. Paul is now acting executive technology at BNZ and BMK, one of the first and I think most actually experienced value stream architects out there. So welcome both.
Thank you very much, Mick, for having us. It's a pleasure to be, here. You have interviewed a lot of my heroes here, so I'm really excited to be here along with Paul. So it's
absolutely, and I think what I absolutely noticed at your talk that was given at DevOps Enterprise Summit that some of what you said really resonated with a lot of people out there trying to put a lot of these practices that are discussed on this podcast into practice. And just where you are in that journey, the things that you've learned in that journey. I'd love to touch on those things today. And notably, it's actually now one of the most watched talks of DevOps Enterprise Summit in the fall. So congratulations on that. I think, again, it was a really important message, the way that you've been leveraging all of the learnings in the community that you talked about in that talk. And really, but I think the really interesting thing, again, is the way that you've been applying these things and your whole approach, the both of you, and the way that you've actually teamed up and partnered in terms of the continual learning that's needed to really get from project to product. And Paul, I will ask you about tenacity versus insanity at some point, as we discussed before, because of course in the learning we do need to do a lot of pivoting. But before we dive into that, it'd be great to have you just say a little bit about why this journey is so important to you. What is it about the business at BNZ and what you're offering to the country, to your clients from this 150-year-old bank that it seems like you're doing quite well already. I think you've got the best online banking experience in New Zealand, as I've heard, and some of the best mobile experiences out there. So what germinated this journey for you, and where are you coming from, and what are the goals that you set out to achieve for the bank?
So, kia ora and welcome everybody. For those who don't know, we're Bank of New Zealand, or BNZ, as we're quite often called. We're extremely proud of the service that we provide to people in this part of the world, and as you said, have won a number of awards. It's a great company, fantastic culture, and I am hugely privileged to be one of the execs looking after the technology section. So, why are we on this journey? And I have to say, look, I've been in technology a fair while. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast probably would have been in technology for a fair while. And when I started, we were all busy with our sort of waterfall processes and how do we deliver technology the best and move through. And of course, we saw the agile revolution in the early 2000s, and we felt there kind of had to be a better way in terms of delivering technology. I am still somewhat embarrassed to represent an industry that quite often fails to deliver on time and on budget so regularly. And it's always very hard to get stats about that, because obviously most companies don't like to share challenges that they have with technology. But so often, we're given analogies like, building an office block, and people like to talk about foundations and things. And so often it's not true. I have a brother who's worked in construction. The blueprints that you have to build off are hugely detailed. It's a very repeatable process. I mean, buildings may look slightly different, but it's very, very standard pattern and practice, hugely repeatable. And we just don't have that in technology. We don't have that yet. I think the best analogy I've seen so far is almost to compare it to making a Hollywood blockbuster movie. which, you've still got a lot of technical things to do. You got to have a great script. You got to, shoot the scenes well. You got to have a great producer and director. You got to do editing and all of those sorts of things. But, in terms of, building, it flows very similar. And at the end of the day, sometimes the costs, and we worry a lot about costs and technology. Sometimes actually what you need to be focused on is how much money the movie's going to make, how effective the technology delivery is going to be to your customers and to your colleagues. And I think that's really key. But yeah, to get back to the key thing, why flow metrics? When I first came into BNZ, we were definitely challenged with how visible work was. And having worked in technology a fair while, I've had people say to me on numerous occasions, "Why do the exec never visit?" We have the CEOs and presidents of companies come around, but they never like to they never want to come into technology. Why is that? We're not important. And I say, we're hugely important. You should hear the way they talk about tech at the boardroom and in the media. We're a tech company. We're not a bank. We're a tech company that happens to do financial services. And people say, well, why do they never show up? And I say, because there is nothing to see. Because you literally walk into a building and you just see lots of people sat at desks staring at screens. And, we've used analogies like going to a factory. I mean, I always challenge most people, if you've had the opportunity to go into a production line, it's fascinating because normally within 20 minutes, you can see where the bottlenecks are. You can turn to the factory and go, that's your oldest piece of equipment. And if I gave you, some money, this would be the thing you'd invest in. And this is definitely where you've got a problem today. You walk into technology and you just see a lot of people sat at desks. How do you see the flow of work? How do you understand what is going on? And even if you do look at the screens, half the time, it's filled with a language you don't understand, lots of curly braces and semicolons, right? It's really tough to kind of understand what people are doing. And so, the benefit of flow metrics is really to bring that to life, to provide that visibility, to provide the transparency of flow so you can see how work is moving through your system. And that is absolutely critical, because if you don't understand how work is flowing, then how do you help people manage it? When your team gets stuck behind a bottleneck, how can you help and assist and help subjugate the constraint and learn to deal with it? And so, having a tool, like Viz from TaskTop is just I think almost a necessity, to be honest with you, Mick, because it enables us to do it. And one final comment I'd make is, what Agile gave us was a lot of Post-it notes on whiteboards, right? I mean, that's to some degree how you started visualizing your flow. And I look at tools from TaskTop, and we're now moving into the next generation, the digital view, the equivalent of all your Post-it notes on a whiteboard, right? And it just gives you so much more. So that's really my view.
Yeah, and I just want to get back to that, because BMK made this great point in that presentation. It was around us moving from value stream mapping and these static maps, which maybe those work for Hollywood blockbusters, right? All the I've seen them, right? The Post-its and the storylines and the storyboards and so on. But fundamentally, I think what we're doing in technology is actually could be quite a bit more complex than pulling off a Hollywood blockbuster. As you were saying that, Paul, I was imagining actually that strong AI will probably start writing Hollywood blockbusters before it starts running digital transformations, because the latter have many more moving parts and much more complexity. So. But before we go there, it was you made this really interesting point in your DevOps Enterprise Summit presentation, that without actually that kind of visibility, the visibility of the dynamics of building software, that creative work, what all those people sat at all those desks at home or in the office are doing, you're blind. And I really found it fascinating how you related that to actually one of the reasons where technology turns into being order takers. Right? If none of this is visible, it's like going back to the production line analogy. It's like the business is now dumping all these requests for cars to be produced without realizing that the capacity for producing cars is 1/10 of what's being dumped, and the capacity for improving those, that old machine that's slowing everything down and removing it and stopping production for a moment while you do that, so you can actually double the flow of production. is never prioritized. And of course, then the points you made about balancing things like technical data and the like. So just if you'd relate to us your experience about that, about how, how Flow has helped move away from this order taker mentality and really how organizations end up there. Because I think that's one of the challenges is technology teams, IT teams, a lot of them are exactly in this mode today. And what you've done with BMZ is actually move the organization ahead of that.
Yeah, I mean, the key issue that we have is the business quite often looks at our delivery pipelines and sees very little coming out of the end, right? And the analogy I use is like a freeway that has no traffic on it. And everyone's saying, oh, great, the road's pretty empty, so let's just keep sticking some more things on because, there's obviously not a lot going on. And what they're missing is that several miles down the freeway, there's a huge traffic jam, right? And it's all blocked. And so, very often, business people tend to see the end of the motorway or freeway, the end of the freeway, and there's no traffic flowing. And so they go, great, we can just keep adding more and more work. And of course, we're trying to deal with the traffic jam, a few miles down. They're effectively just putting more traffic on, more cars, more trucks, etc., and just loading us up. And so, the challenge is how do you visualize that? And how do you provide that view to your colleagues? And really, that's for me the benefit of Flow Metrics. I mean, BMK, do you want to add a few words around that theme?
Oh yeah, I mean, thanks, Paul. I think most of the time the business technology appears to be like a black box, Mick. That's the fact. I mean, because if it is a single product company like a technology company, your business and IT is together, right? Like it's a single stream and single unit. They work together towards a single product or something like that. Example, like you take Spotify or Netflix kind of a company, where technology and business is a single unit. Whereas like, traditional enterprises like banks and government organizations, we always struggle. We use technology to serve our customers and internal customers and external customers. So technology is always actually is an afterthought when it comes to business, 10, 20 years before. But now every company is a technology company. But the struggle for the business is they don't understand what exactly happens in technology. And most of the problems, what Paul is talking about the adding more and more work, because we had when you have all the traditional project managers, and they always think about the best way of resource utilization. But what it means that they keep your technology busy with delivering features, and they keep taking orders, they keep doing a project plans, they keep planning how to the delivery dates, milestones, and rollouts, and etc. But what happens is actually nobody from technology ever made an effort to tell the business what else the technology needs to do in the space, right? And I think the Flow Metrics for us is actually it's a great way to showcase that to our business. And one is actually, the efforts what Paul is doing in the organization at the moment is actually make the work visible. That's the first thing. And number two is actually show them what else is actually technology is doing. Example, like, how do you make the tech debt visible? How do you make that the risk that we are addressing from technology front is important? How unplanned works like incidents are taking our time and what we need to do to address them. For example, I might restore an incident, but I need to spend maybe another couple of hours to update my support documentation, upload my other controls and things. So by the way, next time when this happens, our team they know what to do next, right? So these are some of the things like which business never got an opportunity to see. I think the Flow Metrics is a great way to portray that, and show that this is the amount of risk we are doing, this is the amount of features that we are doing. So I mean, I strongly believe that it's a great tool for product managers and product owners to have a conversation with their counterparts in business and saying that, hey, I can go faster if I address this technical debt. I take an analogy of restaurant. Always, if you want to serve a delicious food to your customer, you need to be having a dishwasher in a working condition in a best way. So it means if it's broken, and ultimate goal will be impacted. And that's my way of looking at it. So it means your broken dishwashers is like a tech debt, and then serving your delicious food is like a feature delivery for your customer. So you need to balance both things. That's my take.
Okay, excellent. And I think the really interesting thing is that a lot of listeners, of course, understand that, right? They have an appreciation for the fact that we need to make work visible, measure flow, and actually focus on bottlenecks and apply the theory of constraints and all these. In the end, right? Look at end-to-end value streams, understand the portfolio, understand the dependencies, understand where the waste is, right? So Now, I think so many organizations are struggling with actually how to scale this, how to apply it. And I think you've been through some of those initial phases, and some of what you've reflected in our conversations and your presentations is really meaningful. Because I'll tell you the thing that I'm seeing across organizations deploying the flow framework, this ways of measuring flow, giving the business a perspective on flow distribution, as you've been doing, where things tend to go, I think, stall out and sideways, is that the organization is actually not set up with capacity to do anything about that. So all of a sudden, you've got these very visible bottlenecks, right? All of a sudden, you see that you have to go cut down 10 trees, and you simply don't have the right saw or the right axe to do this, and there's no capacity for actually going to sharpen that axe or buy a chainsaw or whatever. This metaphor is going to go a little too far now, but. How have you approached that? And Paul, I heard you say, as we were just chatting right before this podcast, I think one of the more profound things I've heard, and I really want to explore this further, is given that you've already had the insights from bottlenecks within your organization and seeing parts of your portfolio, how do we actually get organizations to prioritize improvement? Because what we see from great organizations is that they're continually improving. They're prioritizing the improvement of daily work as much as they are prioritizing daily work, because they see the payoff, right? They see that if they improve flow, all of a sudden, some of the business metrics everyone's after are improving, right? In the end, we want these flow metrics to be leading indicators for business outcomes and for our business counterparts to see that. And I think, Paul, you've got a very unique perspective being on the executive team right now in terms of having made that case and made it clear. But in the end, the entire organization has to start prioritizing that. And oftentimes what I've experienced is it's something that hasn't been done before, because we've had this cost center and order taking mentality for so long. So I'd like you both to kind of build out the statement, but starting, Paul, with what I've heard you say, which again I think is just so profound, is thinking about how we reward for improvement, just not only reward for output, where we've structured our companies for so long for rewarding for output.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, Mick. And look, it is a challenge. When I normally talk about my esteemed business colleagues, they normally form an orderly queue with a sign that says, "Where are my features?" Right? Because they're very clear. That's what we're paid for. That is what makes the company profitable. That's what provides great service to our customers. Great tools and experiences for our colleagues, to serve our customers as well, and there are these assumptions around technology, things that are just given. The fact we will be secure, the fact that we will be scalable, the fact that we will be high performant, etc. So rarely do I talk with colleagues. They're very clear about their feature state. And then you say, and how much would you like to invest? How much should we invest in making this secure? Because security is an investment, scalability is an investment, robustness, disaster recovery, BCP is an investment. How much would you like us to invest in those? And they kind of look blankly and just kind of go, well, I thought you were looking after that. And isn't that just sort of built into the cost, because we're kind of assuming it's free of charge? We're just paying for features. And I think the next big challenge, because I think we've been aware of this for a while, but the next big challenge is then to say, and how much would you like us to invest in continuous improvement? How much would you like us to invest in flow? How much would you like us to invest in getting better, so that when we have this conversation next year, we're effectively 20% cheaper and 50% faster? And that's a great conversation. And I still think that is so rarely had in most companies, and effectively, a real challenge, because one of the insights we've had recently is that looking at flow, most people who study it just get it and understand it. The way I found out about it was a good friend of mine handed me your book, basically, and I read it over the vacation, and I just came back to the office and went, finally, here we go, the digital version of what I've been looking for. It's exactly what we need. Let's get on with it. And of course, the first thing I got met with was confusion, not resistance, but people saying, well, we're pretty busy. This is great. What's your latest random thing that you've kind of, how do we just push the boss into a kind of container and not let him do too much damage while we just get on with the real work that that we've been trying to do all year. Yeah, I mean, eventually you share the idea, you get a coalition of the willing. People just generally understand, and then we go out and we go, let's do this thing. And the first thing you find is that people are incented to deliver, not to improve. And it is definitely a challenge in the organization, because you then sort of say, well, all right, how do we do both things? Because we cannot just down tools. We're not in a position to say, hey, look, we'll do this continuous improvement to the exclusion of everything else. And one of the big challenges always is how do you do multiple things in parallel? Because we know serialization is much easier. It's much easier just to do one thing at a time, one after the other. But you lose out in terms of speed. We need parallelism. We need to be able to do multiple things. But just like my friendly network engineers will tell me, the minute you do things in parallel in the network world, you get synchronization issues, you get crosstalk. You get all those standard things just in terms of moving bits on a wire, right? And we get the same thing with people. Yeah, we have synchronization problems, we have crosstalk problems, we have those issues, right? We have coordination that we have to manage. And so, the teams are then saying, well, how do we deal with this challenge, between these particular things? And really, at the end of the day, what we have to do is we have to start saying to people, we will reward you for improvement, because historically we've been rewarding for output and delivery, which is still a great metric. And I'm not on a podcast going to suggest to people that they don't reward for output, because I'm always very clear with the team that this is what pays our bills, this is what justifies our existence, right? At the end of the day, we have to deliver effective technology for the benefit of our customers. That's our role in life. That's what drives us forwards. But we must find a way to be more effective and efficient as we do that, and to continuously improve. And so we're now going to be leaning in much more into teams and saying, look, how do we reward you for this improvement, not just for delivering outputs. And there's a great quote, I think it might be a misquote, I'm not sure, to Abraham Lincoln, which basically said, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. And it's a really easy quote to make. I think works very well in the head. You can get a good mental model. And sometimes I feel I go down and watch all the teams sat in front of their PCs, and I feel I've just got teams of people out in the forest with blunt axes, just whacking away at trees, and quite often not making a lot of progress, right? And how do we call them in and at least give them some time to sharpen the axe? We can't just bring everybody in, close the doors, and say, hey, we're now focusing on axe sharpening for the next month, and you'll see no productivity, because we can't serialize in that way. But we do need to set aside time for it.
Yeah, and in terms of what I've seen in successful deployments of the Flow framework, but more importantly, acceleration of business outcomes, of time to market, of just technology excellence, is this component. And I think just basically operationalizing time for teams to improve, to run those experiments and to increase flow. And then, of course, to be disciplined about it, because like you said, Paul, we can't go down tools, right? The things need to be delivered. But the amazing thing is that the amount of capacity that's freed up quickly, and the sort of fast feedback cycle, fluid feedback that you can get from actually going after those bottlenecks it's invigorating for teams as well. But there's this chicken and egg, where if it's not systematized somehow, and I think your point on rewarding for improvement is one of the most powerful things I've seen work out there, because it really just changes the structure and the nature of incentives for teams and changes how they think. And I think if we just leave it to teams, again, who feel like they're constantly behind and are being told they're constantly behind, it doesn't unwind itself. And these behaviors don't unwind themselves. And I think your approach, I want to dig into one thing here with and BMK would be great to hear your reflections on this, because one thing that you have done, I think, clearly and differently, and this is sort of back to this notion of ownership, right? Paul, you've taken personal ownership of this because you realize how much value it stands to deliver to your bank, to your partners, to your customers, and you've assigned ownership to it internally. I think that, the things we've learned from Amazon is if you don't have kind of some level of single-threaded ownership, someone who's looking at that, let's say just one point, the architecture, it's, again, it falls by the wayside as priorities change, as urgencies come up. So how did you get, and then it'd be great to hear BMK's perspective on this. What made you create the role of value stream architecture? Actually, which of you created it, by the way? Who convinced whom here?
So Paul, I think so. When Paul came in, actually, me and Paul, we had a constant chat about a few things. What's happening, actually, I mean, for me, it's about looking at what's happening around me, and then in a technology, in terms of architecture, in terms of our practices, technical practices, agile practices, and site reliability engineering, DevOps, etc. Various topics that we often connect and talk about it. And one of the things that Paul asked me last year was actually, okay, BMK, if you're doing a role different to what you're doing, what is that? And I went back and thought about it. Then I wrote a few points, and I went back to Paul and said, Paul, this is what I think is actually it's a good idea that I would like to do. And then Paul looked at it and they said that, so what if I introduce this role as actually a value stream architect? Will you be interested? And as soon as I heard the term, actually, because I read about your blog post and I read about Dominica's and about the value stream architecture and also the IT Revolution paper on your book, and then it sounds, wow, that is something like, I have a leader who is now talking about holistic view of end-to-end, the value stream thing, and somebody who has realized the importance of having a role like a value stream architect, who can help the organization in terms of optimizing the flow. Because I stole straight away, actually. The role title, it came from Paul. And as soon as he made that, I never had a second thought on that. Me being a technical developer. And what it told me, the Paul stance on that is actually, okay, now you have a leader for the technology in an organization who's now thinking about developer experience, developer productivity, and then their growth and those what Sally was talking about in your last podcast, growth items, right? And giving the developers, the engineers in your organization the headspace for improving their way how they are doing their daily work. I think it's very, very important. I know that the Paul's analogy about the blunt axe and things, which I feel a lot of technology, in a lot of engineers in technology, they don't really understand that. And how many people in your organization, they come up and tell you that, hey, Mick, I found the easiest way of doing these things. Would you want me to try this? And can I do an experiment? Can I show you that how we can do that? You need to have a right level of leadership support in an organization to do a few things. So I think the Paul. I will give the credit to. I've given the credit to Paul. So it's Paul's idea about value stream architect, and I think what I'm seeing is actually now more and more we need to start aligning in this space, and that's more important for us. And the primary focus is being helping the developers experience and helping the developer productivity. It's a critical thing for non-technology organizations like us. Of course, we are a tech company, in terms of banking and things. But what I mean by that is actually, though you're a financial institution, but CEO of your organization or chief CX of your organization cannot take developer experience very lightly. Now they have to put primary, they need to have that actually the staff well-being, staff productivity. In terms of developer experience and productivity, it's actually one of the primary thing in their board level report.
Actually, and let's dig into that, because I think one of the transformational aspects to how you're doing transformation, so one of the non-standard things, I think unique things that I've seen actually done elsewhere now as well, but I think I saw you doing it much earlier, is treating this at that level, right? Treating developer experience at the board level and actually using, because I think we have a limited set of tools as leaders. We want to do well by our developers, well by what we deliver to the business. But in the end, we can really adapt the structure and the dynamics of the organization to enable flow, to have the right signal surface, to have bottleneck surface and the like. And I think what you've prioritized, I think, is very powerful, right? The fact that you put developer experience onto board reporting, that you actually put flow and flow metrics onto your board report. So what the power that has, and of course it's not an overnight journey when you do this, right? It's not like everything changes overnight, but at least it leaves the organizational space to make some of those dynamics of surfacing tech that visible for more than just regulatory purposes. Paul, I first learned from you that you actually have regulatory needs to report on tech debt, which is another fascinating thing I'd like to touch on. But how did you end up there? What made you realize, and what effect has it had, the journey of doing that, right? Of actually making it this a first-class part. And it's easier said, we've got a lot of organizations out there who basically say, we're now a technology company. who was this, but we're now a technology company, but nothing has changed on the board reports. So how are you a technology company if you don't have first class engineering, development, and flow metrics?
Yeah, it's a great point, Mick. It's so easy to say things, and doing them and providing the evidence is different. So Bank of New Zealand is part of the National Australia Bank Group, and our exec of technology over in Australia, a gentleman Patrick Wright, and I have to give him credit for this, but he's taught me something that I use a lot, which is people keep coming up and saying, oh, this is a problem, that's a problem, how do we get the board to understand, how do we do this, and he just says, imagine if we ran technology, imagine what we could do. And so often, and I mean, it's very easy to say, but so often it's an aha moment, right? And so just going back to the conversation about value stream architects, it's very important for any tech leaders who are on the call. It is so important for you to go and talk to your teams. It is so important for you to make time with people at the coalface, because they will tell you what the experience of working in your company is like. They will tell you what's going on, why we're not productive, the bureaucracy and things. And then so often you go back and go, oh, that's a problem. It's been a problem for a long time. I wonder how we can do that. And I'll challenge everyone listening. Just imagine if you ran technology. Just imagine what you could do. You could do things like say, hey, we're going to put flow metrics on our board reporting. And yes, you'll have to convince people, and you'll have to educate people, and you'll have to find people to help you do that. But I think so often we get stuck in, traditional frameworks of, well, developers do this, testers do this, QA people do this, security people do this. We have this type of architecture, we have this type of, whatever, and so often I'm challenged, because even when we make technology changes in tech around the way we do things, so rarely do we take that out wider. I mean, when Agile first surfaced, how are we persuading our finance teams how Agile work? How about our risk team and our auditors? I came across this when we first adopted Agile methodologies, and then we had auditors who turned up who've been trained in waterfall processes for the last 20 years, because that's the way technology always did things. And so guess what? They audited us against their waterfall processes that they knew, and were so shocked when technology was suddenly saying, well, that's not the way we do things around here anymore. And I have to say, my first audit, I got a sea of red and escalations to the board. Please explain, because you don't seem to be behaving the way we expect. You've spent 20 years training us that this is what good looks like in technology, and now you're changing things. And so, I mean, those 2 points, right? Imagine if you ran tech, but when you do then say, great, we're going to look at effectively driving this change, how do you educate those around you? How do you demonstrate the value of that change? And I think so often this is where organizations run into trouble, is that changes can get made, and because people don't understand, etc., it's kind of like a rubber band. You stretch the band, and it takes a lot of strength to hold that tension, right? Because so easily, the minute you stop focus, and we're all pretty busy, it's, modern life is pretty stressful. There's a lot of things going on, all the unplanned work that keeps turning up and demanding your attention, that rubber band just so quickly snaps back. And everybody just goes, oh, well, that was an interesting experiment, but let's just go back to this way. And, your teams get frustrated, and then you get self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Where people go, well, I knew this was never going to work. I'm now back to the experience I had before, which I don't like, but at least it's familiar, and we'll just keep pressing on as best we can. So it really is about taking that step forwards, keeping the focus and the execution, and then when you have challenges, to pivot. You mentioned earlier that I'm a big believer in tenacity. Something that I talk to people a lot about when they say to me, how are you successful, and how do you have a successful IT career and move forwards? I say, well, you've got to have good skills and great behaviors as well. But I think that you need to have tenacity, because I think life is tough, and you have to have tenacity, and you have to be able be prepared to accept your failures, learn and move on, and just keep pushing through and learning, and educating people around tenacity is really tough. And then coupled with the tenacity, though, is the ability to pivot. And I think, this is probably very similar to, what you tell startup companies as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think it was Albert Einstein who said, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. And so while I'm a big believer in tenacity, you have to then, learn, inspect and adapt. So what happened? What do we need to change? How do we effectively move forwards?
Yeah, it's Paul. I think this snapping back. I think it's just so frequent. I think, and it's so difficult for people in your roles. I know across other organizations in terms of getting things pointed in the right direction, but then things snapping back into order taking. And this amazing thing I find happens when the teams start experiencing faster flow and that kind of engagement. But it does, there's a fair amount of unlearning to do because the systems have been structured this way. So I think that's a great way to put it, right? It requires tenacity, and then I want to dig into this because you've done more. You've had the tenacity, but you've also taken the education and learning aspect of this, right? In the end, the teams have to start learning how to pivot, right? They have to start taking ownership and accountability of their flow. And once they do, things change. But if they're snapping back because they're too busy, they've been too overloaded, there's no time for change because they're too behind, too many. And frankly, there's a lot changing out from underneath these teams, right? You're moving to cloud, you're deploying microservices, you're leveraging new technology stacks. So there's so much change already that I think, again, it goes back to if we've systematized learning and improvement, we're on the right path. And so I want to dig in. So you've talked already about the sort of the rewarding for improvement, which, by the way, I know I'll quickly relate this. I know one organization, thousands of developers, where they actually incentivized the learning to see, just the title of Domenica's book, but actually making work visible and showing flow distribution. They put that into the bonus structure of technology leaders and product owners, just because, again, just to avoid that snapping back. And then after that, they actually they put into, and I'm not saying that the bonus structure is the best tool to do it. It was just interesting to watch how they did this, actually improving flow. Because of course, when you start improving flow, you've got, they already knew this from experiments that run, you've got happier developers and technology staff because work just got easier. So your engagement scores improve, and then you start creating this virtuous cycle. But to do that, I think what we're seeing is you have to get people on board. You have to have them understand, and the understanding has to go beyond the two of you, obviously. And the way that you have structured, and BMK, maybe you can speak to this because I know you've shown me some of these materials. The learning, the portal, the education, bringing in not just agile experts, but experts in organizational design, experts in DevOps, all of this. And again, looking at teaching the organization about these value streams and about flow, and creating a set of resources in the internal learning systems that you've got and the portals. Can you speak a bit to that? Because again, I think what you've done is what everyone else should be doing, and it's so rare to see it.
I think education is one of the important aspect of transformation, Mick, in my view, which Paul agrees as well. Like the way that you can transform the organization is like the way that you transform the people. The way to transform the people is actually by training and empowering and enabling them to do the right thing for your organization, right? So when we started this journey of flow and flow framework, and actually, I started back in 2014 thinking about it, like how do we bring the sharing across the organization as actually a thing? Because I always tell a story, how I got into DevOps as a story is that I was a lead architect for one of the lending program. And we were working out actually what is the plan for doing the production deployment BMK. Then we thought, okay, hey, I'm an experienced developer. I've done the system design. So it was going to take like 2.5 hours on Friday evening, because Friday evening is what you do the production deployment. After us, you don't want to have an impact on your customer and business. So it was back in 2014. And then what happened was actually that actual production deployment took 2.5 days. And we went on until Monday morning, 3:00 to get anything and everything up and running. And 8:00, we made the system go live. But what happened was actually that was an eye-opener for me. And I came back the next day morning, and then I started documenting all this. Actually, what did we really do wrong here? Why it took 2.5 days where we were anticipating it can be done in 2.5 hours. So then I understood that, okay, there are a lot of things that we keep doing in the old way of doing. And we know only, okay, that's the way how we are done for the last 10 years. And there is no other way that you can think about it. And that was the biggest change. Like, converting your Word documents into an automated deployment scripts, actually a big step change for us in those days. And the same thing that we did back in 2018 with the database deployments as well. We changed that. The one thing from 2014 I constantly started doing in the organization, which is not part of my role, but I was really passionate about it, was bringing some of the industry experts into organization and sharing their experience outside of what's happening, right? Because sometimes that's actually, when you're really busy doing your day-to-day job, you don't have enough time to lift your head up and look at what's happening around you and what you can learn from other organizations or from people, etc. Right? So then I started connecting more to the community, what other people are doing, what other organizations are doing, and I started inviting them to the BNZ actually. So we call them as actually continuous learning series in the organization, where we invite some of the industry experts, which you were part of and Nicole part of, and a few other people part of in the past. We continue to run the education session. So that's number one. Number two, people learn from a different, they have a different, style of learning. Some people, they're very interested in learning in a connected mode, like, in an in-person training program. The others are very happy to go back and watch videos or learn from a textbook or learn from their materials. So we stood up something called Flow Hub. Flow Hub is actually a centralized repository for all the materials that we want to talk about: value stream, flow metrics, flow framework, and the other improvements and all the training programs that we offer around that, including Flow Academy, the Tossed Up Academy, the training program. So we centralized that in a single place, and we made it with a short URL and said, anybody who would like to know about value stream or flow and flow framework in the organization, simply go, and this is a very short URL for you. Just click on that and you can land on that. So I think that we received a very good feedback, because we have done in the past with other systems as well. So that is number two. So we made an offline content available for people who can interact. And the third thing that we have done is actually what we constantly started running drop-in sessions with the help of people like Carmen and Dominica, and Tom and Mara from Tossed Up as well. And not only that, and also we brought people from within the organization who can talk about flow and who can talk about flow framework. Some of the pilot teams, they were sharing their experience as well. So the important aspect is that when people share their experience, what has changed, how it has changed in their day-to-day life, as I talk about flow. I remember in one of the earlier discovery sessions, we were asking, and the developers say that my job is done when I commit my code, but we want to change that aspect. No, your job doesn't complete, when you say I commit my code. You need to learn from the feedback from what customer is doing. You need to learn from the production systems. You need to learn from how you can bring those feedback into your organization, right? So this is the important aspect of the learning. So what we have done is actually enable the people, get the right information, learn from experts within the organization, but at the same time bring some of the industry experts into the organization. So by the way, we can establish a continuous learning. And this is what we call, Henrik Niebeck calls us actually self-improving, right? Like self-improving organization. So it's not that you're waiting for a moment to happen to improve. Oh, then all of a sudden, like for example, Log4j example, now we need to do something about it. No, you constantly upskill and constantly transform yourself as an individual. And by the way, then you can be at the best version every day at work. So by the way, you can contribute to a greater outcome of the organization, what it is. So that, I think that is the important aspect of the Flow Hub and what we have done in terms of education.
Yeah, and I think, again, everything I've seen around that Flow Hub, I think these things are powerful. Of course, some of these things take time to emanate across the organization and people to learn. But if there's that establishing, driving that culture of learning, and not just telling people they need a culture of learning, but giving them a short URL, as you said, it's so key. And then there's one more thing that I've noticed in your approach, which may not be novel to you, but I think is sadly too novel in terms of my experiences in large enterprise organizations, is the way that you base, as you said it, you aim high, but you just get started, right? Just get things deployed, start measuring, start that flow feedback, continual learning loop going. Tell me about what your experience there has been, right? Because I know you've, for example, one of the stories that you shared is you saw a team who was reporting their flow efficiency as 80%. But rather than stressing that can't be right, it's like, well, no, now let's celebrate the fact that, okay, we're missing some step of the process. Of course, we can't be at 80% yet if we're calling done before value's actually been delivered. So just share a bit about that. Maybe, Paul, you could start on just the importance of not waiting for things to get right, not waiting till the next part of the transformation is done, or the next microservice architecture is deployed and so on. But this, in the end, it's that tenacity, that pivoting, and that starting today that I think has got you and BNZ on such a better trajectory than so many of the transformations out there.
Yeah, it's a really good point. When I started my agile journey, one of the phrases that really resonated with me was unlock the intrinsic motivation of your knowledge workers. And it really spoke to me. I mean, I've been fortunate. I came through as a software developer and an architect, and I believe that the best way for companies to succeed is to unleash the power of the teams that we have. As a leader, it's important that I have a clear vision and know where we're trying to head to the company. But my job is really to remove roadblocks and allow people to be, as BMK said, the best versions of themselves, to turn up to work every day and to love what they're doing. And I think we all deserve that, right? I think it's hard. I think especially large corporates, we tend to have a lot of rules and bureaucracy and challenges. And I always say as well, when you ask 1,000 people what they think, you get 1,000 different opinions, right? And so that's always pretty tough to deal with. But why do we need to get started straight away? And the reason is that I can start trying to get everything perfect before we start, but there's only one of me. There's a lot of other people, and so that's really not going to scale and not be particularly productive. And one of the benefits that we saw with starting earlier, as you've mentioned, is that one of the challenges, of course, is the quality of data. We've put flow metrics across Jira, and as ever, our Jira data is not as consistent as we would like. It's really not at the level that we would want. And so putting it in and starting, what ended up happening was we had teams that then, when they looked through their first iterations, they went, wow, we're like 80 and 90% flow efficient, because that's what the data says. And what was great was that without any intervention required, they all kind of looked at each other and went, that's not right. That's not right. There's no way we're that flow efficient. There must be a problem here. There's probably a problem in our data. I think we should fix it. And so suddenly you've got a team that's intrinsically motivated to go and resolve the issues in data, as opposed to a management team turning up saying, we've looked at your data team. It's not as good as we want it to be. You need to fix that. Oh, and by the way, you still also have to deliver all these other features. You have to deal with your tech debt. You got to build these business features. You've got to put these risk things in. You got to worry about security and all the other stuff. And the chances of getting that data as a high priority, getting that data resolved as a high priority, is pretty difficult. And so, my advice is that it is important to get started, because you will find that things are not perfect. They never are. And if you want things to improve, it is important that people then get to see that. We go back to visibility and ownership. And people are, we're giving people the opportunity to be masters of their own destiny here, as opposed to some senior management team sort of strolling around saying, right, you do this, you do that, you do the other. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in focus and discipline, but I also say to people that this isn't the military, and if you want to treat knowledge workers in that way, then you better start running 2 years of boot camp to kind of train them up to be a much more kind of command and control environment. I'm not wanting to make commentary on our armed forces. They're fantastic people that work for them. But in knowledge management, I'm not sure it's the most effective way, to get that innovation, especially, when things are so, fast changing, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think it's really important that you get started so that you get the teams the ability to take ownership of their own destiny and how they're going to drive things forwards.
Yeah, I'll add to that point, actually. So I think the one of the things that I've found out is actually the data is scary. right? The data is scary in any form. Like, for example, if you're borrowing a loan for a mortgage from a bank, and then when you look at how much you're borrowing, that's scary. Like, the interest rate that you pay is scary. Then how much of issues that you have in the organization from technology perspective, it's scary. So the numbers are really scary. And but the thing is that when you see, I mean, what happened with flow metrics for us is actually when the team never seen anything like that about their flow and about their efficiency, how many items they're completing like that. I mean, of course, you have all other metrics like your velocity, burn down, cumulative flow diagrams, and all other metrics that you have. But what flow metrics has done for us is actually showing that to their own team members. Hey, this is what our flow efficiency is. As Paul said, that number 80% or 86%, which is not right. But if you're going to wait to clean up anything and everything and start fresh and make it perfectly, what Paul calls us actually waiting for the stars aligned kind of a thing, you will never get started. Because you keep going back in the discussions, discussing after discussion about discussion, right? You don't want to get there. What you want to do is actually, okay, agree on something. What is the minimum that you need to start off and start there? I mean, when you look at the very first iteration of your data, the data might not be right, which is perfectly fine. But when you start seeing the data, then you start understanding that, okay, might be my Jira is not right. Maybe the way how our team is updating is not right. Maybe the work categorization is not right. For example, when we started with flow metrics, when we did the very first time, we told all the teams, because we don't want to scare them, telling, hey, in order to take off with the flow framework and flow metrics, you need to do 20 things. As soon as if you tell them, that will put them off. And they said, oh, we are too busy already, and we don't want to do the things. What we told them rather is actually, hey, whatever the state you are, we are happy to plug in your data and start ingesting and looking at it. And what happened was the very first few iterations of our flow framework and flow distribution is all green. All right, it's only feature. Then the question we started asking, during our coaching session and modeling session, okay, so it means you're doing only all features. So what about risk? Oh yeah, there are a few risk items there. Oh, what about your tech debts? Oh yes, there are some tech debts. Oh, what is happening with your unplanned incidents and in a production outage systems? Oh yeah, there are a few. Then the team started getting hang of it and saying, okay, right, now I can start categorizing my work. So by the way, I can have a meaningful conversation with the teams. And also the teams turn to have something like a very big bucket of BAU activity, and what goes inside the BAU activity, nobody knows about it, right? And they have a regular few things like checking in and cleaning up and writing documentation, updating some processes, etc. But you need to really call out that, because when you're having conversation with people like, leaders in the organization like Paul or any other GMs or your head of tech or maybe your product owners, then you can show them the data. I mean, that's I believe that actually the flow framework and flow metrics is actually a fantastic way to empower the teams to have the right conversation with their business counterparts, with the head of tech and with their technology leaders. The reason, because you are telling them what is the flow efficiency. You're telling them what is your flow count and flow, velocity for your team. That is the best way to actually explain them, because then you can go and bang on and ask that, hey, Paul, we would like to put off 2 weeks of stop doing a feature because we have quite a bit of techniques that we would like to go and address them, right? Because without the data, it's all subjective. Because as a senior developer, I can go and talk to Paul saying, hey, Paul, I think this is the right thing to do in the organization. What do you think? Maybe Paul might agree or might not agree. But if I have a data to back that up with conversation, I think that is actually a powerful thing for us. And flow framework and flow metrics has given an opportunity where a data-driven continuous improvement an opportunity. And not only that, now people started thinking about the value stream. They started thinking about all the activities, right? Like making work visible is not about actually all the work that you do, what you get from business, but also all the work that you do within the team. Example, I'm doing an architecture design, I'm doing a solution design paper, I'm going to an architecture review board for review. I'm talking with security people, I'm talking with the network team to firewall and security updates, etc. So when you start visualizing all the different activities that's happening in your value stream and the people, the role that they play, the information that's flowing in that, and then you start to get to see the holistic view of what's happening in your team from start to end, right? And I think that's really a powerful way for the value stream thinking is really a powerful way for teams to take on now, rather than looking from a project and silos to focus like, okay, I do something and then disappear. No, you being a long-standing product development team who continue to work on the product value stream, right? That's more important. I think that, I believe that BNZ is in the right position at the moment. And because it's called out a couple of years before, actually, we need to take on product management practices a bit more seriously.
Yeah, BMK, I think that's amazing. I think going back to what you said, Paul, it ends up being what you celebrate as well, right? Is if the teams are celebrating faster flow, if a team just demonstrated, yes, it took more time to move things onto a microservice that was provided to them, or maybe to build a microservice, but now they're actually able to deliver at double the pace. Those things are getting celebrated, and not only being celebrated, there's that time for that improvement, time for that tech debt reduction, time for the retiring that legacy system. So we were at time, but thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think again, there's just so much learning that you've done, and you sharing with the community. And I know you both appreciate learning from the community, but I think I just wanted to be clear how much so many of us appreciate your learnings and how you've adapted these things to your scale and to these difficult organizational challenges, and just how meaningful the outcomes are for BNZ and for your customers. So, any last words to wrap it up?
Oh, look, Mick, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and I think BMK talked earlier about the technology community. I love working in technology. It's such a privilege to be able to do this, but it's also it can be tough. It can be lonely, etc. for everybody. And I think as a community, it's so important that we come together, that we learn off each other, we support each other, we get mutual benefit. And so, I'm hugely privileged to be in the team I'm in with Bank of New Zealand. I'm hugely grateful for that opportunity, and I would also love the opportunity, to talk to people, around the globe. Everyone who's listening to this podcast, please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to hear what other people are doing as well. And thank you for doing these podcasts, because that's a great opportunity for us to hear from others and learn as well. So thank you, very, very grateful.
Hey, thank you very much, Mick, for the opportunity. I think, as Paul said, it's great to be here in this podcast, sharing some of our experience and learning. And what we have done as part of this, the Flow Framework Slack channel that you have, I've already shared some of our BNZ, the infographics that we did for the Learn to See and Learn to Improve, those things, and that there, so people can take on that. And I would like to owe some of my credits back to DevOps Enterprise Summit, because DevOps Enterprise Summit, where I met you in person, back in 2018, I got that book and I got a free book from you, a bunch of 10, 15 copies. Then I came back and gave away in Auckland in DevOps days back then. So I think, as Paul said, it's important that we learn as a community together. We share, we care, and we grow together. It resonates really with me what Gene Kim talks about in his DevOps Enterprise Summit, the banner, right? Getting together to go faster. I think it doesn't mean it's just only within the technology, within the organization, but it's also actually applicable for the wider community as well. I think that's more important for us. And I think we are grateful to be in this space where we have people like you and people like Gene and people like John Willis and other great thought leaders in the space who are sharing with us, and also giving us opportunity, this podcast and other DevOps Enterprise Summit and other forums where we can share our experiences, what is working well, what is not working well, and what challenges we have and what we need to work on in the future. I think, as Paul said, BNZ is a great place to be. And we have an amazing leader like Paul here, and we have highly talented, motivated people in the organization. I think we will have more stories to share in future with you about Flow and Flow Framework.
Yeah, and we will be eagerly awaiting those. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being such a key part of the community. A huge thank you to both Paul and BMK for joining me on this episode. For more, follow me on my journey on LinkedIn, Twitter, or using the hashtags MIC+1 or Project to Product. You can reach out to Paul and BMK on LinkedIn. I have a new episode every few weeks, so hit subscribe to join us again. You can also search for Project to Product to get the book, and remember that all of the proceeds go to supporting women and minorities in technology. Thanks, stay safe, and until next time.